And it's Christmas Day, Gelding. We're doing the racing show today, pre-record, because you and I are off to the races tomorrow.
Um, Good afternoon, Professor. Hopefully this will go to air in the morning. But yes, Merry Christmas to yourself and to all our listeners.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the same from me, Gelding.
Yes.
And
Uh,
thanks for all those people who left little paper bags for us during the year because they enjoyed our tips so much.
They must have left them at your place, Professor.
They left nothing here, Gelding. They're a
Uh,
little bit too far to come out of Melbourne to drop them off here. I thought they might have dropped them off at your place.
oh, no, nothing to deliver, Professor. But as you rightly said, well, we might give ourselves a little Christmas present tomorrow when we celebrate the GM Racing Christmas party at Caulfield.
Yeah, and we'll do it in style, Gelding.
We will indeed, Professor.
Now, Gelding, the Heath track. The Melbourne Racing Club must be listening to That's Racing or watching That's Racing because we've been harping on about how the Heath track hasn't been used. It's being used again tomorrow.
Um, a glut of racing, Professor, at the Caulfield Heath track, the inner track that the previous committee at the built at the cost of many millions of dollars, Professor, and then was hardly ever used and sat there, and now seems to be a race meeting there every week, Professor, for the month of December. And here we are going to a traditional racing day, Boxing Day at Caulfield, and it's not even on the main track. What's going on?
A traditional racing day of Boxing Day at Caulfield Gelding, but not on the traditional track.
Can you remember a Boxing Day meeting being anywhere bar Caulfield?
No, I can't. Not in my recent memory.
No, I can't think of a, Professor. Maybe when they're building the grandstand, they might have moved it to the defunct track now called Sandown, but where no one seems to race anymore. But yeah, so let's a new committee on board. Let's break with tradition. Let's not use the main track for a main race day.
Well, Gelding, there's one other thing. You talked about a glut of racing. We know where there's no glut of racing. That's at Sandown.
Yes, Professor, I believe you've been doing a bit of study on that. Could you tell the listeners how long has it been since we've raced at Sandown?
Grand final day, Gelding, 3 months ago.
3 months ago. And have we got anything coming up next week or 2 weeks or something?
Not until February, Gelding. So the tracks out there will have a 4-month holiday.
Okay. Geez, it'd want to be presented fairly well, wouldn't it, with a 4-month rest from anything?
Well, we'd hope the rail's in the true position, wouldn't we?
Yeah. I wonder what would happen, Professor. How long would the grass be?
Oh no, Gelding, they've got to keep maintaining it. They're pumping thousands of dollars into keeping it maintained, so it's presentable at all times.
Okay. So 4 months of the year, Professor. Now, when I went to high school in maths, that'd be a third of the year, wouldn't it?
Yep.
So you'd have 2 tracks out there you're not using for a third of the year.
Well, they've got 2 tracks at Caulfield they've got to use now, Gelding.
Oh, right. Okay, Professor. Sorry.
All right, Gelding.
What about Flemington? Do you reckon they'll have to do some work on that soon for overuse?
Well, that's not being used either. It hasn't been used since the carnival, Gelding. Spring carnival.
Okay. All righty.
There's head scratching going on here, Gelding, I tell you.
There is indeed, Professor. Now, Gelding, when do you think work will start at Caulfield to support the Parlay shirt that you're wearing, Professor?
Oh, that's a long way down the track, Gelding. I might not even see it. I might not be alive. It's a pipe dream for people as old as me, Gelding.
Oh, Professor. Things are certainly happening, aren't they?
Happening slowly.
Very good.
All right, Gelding now. Only 8 races tomorrow. Interesting. And the 2 feature races are race 7 and race 8, which goes against tradition because in the days of the 8-race programs, Gelding, which dates back to when my grandmother was alive, tell me this: what were the 2 feature races numbered?
Well, the Daily Double used to be race 5 and race 7, Professor.
Correct, Gelding.
And they were normally the 2 highly rated races of the program.
Well, the listed race, the Nick Johnstone Christmas Stakes, is the last race on the program, Gelding. So they must have it last so they can get the international feed.
Right. So we're we're having a traditional Boxing Day races at Caulfield. As we've said, they've done for many a year, as long as I can remember. But they've decided to break tradition by we won't have the Daily Double on race 5 and race 7, the 2 main races, and being the first leg and the third leg of the quadrella, but we'll have the traditional number of races in 8 instead of 10, and we'll race on the inner track. Maybe it's a new tradition, Professor.
Well, you make tradition 1 year at a time, Gelding.
Yeah, interesting.
All right,
Very
Gelding,
interesting.
Track's currently rated a good 4. I would think that if they haven't pumped a heap of water into it, it's going to be pretty solid. Probably be upgraded to a good 3, I would have thought.
Yeah, Professor. Look, I'm always weary, and I'll say to our listeners and punters just to be a bit careful. Caulfield is traditionally, they do pump a lot of water. Now, I don't know so much about the Heath track, but the Heath track is one that has been favouring kind of being on-pace runners. So tomorrow with the hot weather, if they pump plenty of water in, Professor, let's hope it's an even spread and it doesn't create lanes. So, I'm hoping, there's not a fast lane up on the fence that'll favour front runners, or there's not a lane where you've got to hook out wide to get the run because the water's soaked down towards the fence. So, Professor, look for the early races, as we always warn, to see what the pattern of racing will be for the day.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention at the top of the program, Gelding, it's heat-affected meeting tomorrow, so the first's been moved forward to 11:15 a.m. So punters should take note of that because we don't want them missing out on getting their bets on. And the last race is at 3 p.m. so that we can all get home before it gets too hot.
And the reason for our podcast today, Professor.
Exactly right, Gelding. Exactly right. The rail's out 2 metres, Gelding. Does that surprise you at all?
Oh, well, if there's one track being used in metropolitan Melbourne, it's the Caulfield Heath track during December. So we've had 3 meetings on it or 4 meetings on it, Professor. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
All right. The tips, Gelding, for your 2 best bets for tomorrow are?
My 2 tips, Professor, going later in the day. The first one's in the race 7, the listed mile race. I've gone for number 3, Marble Arch, Professor, showing around about the $4.60. It's a last start winner at the track. It also showed a bit of good form prior to that, especially at Flemington over the carnival. Trained by the Hayes brothers, to be ridden by the informed Daniel Stackhouse, Professor. So I think that's pretty good value in the listed mile race. It's been racing in about that company. As I said, it's one on the track. That'll do me to get me away. Race 7, number 3. Worried about the Peter Moody, Catherine Coleman trained Riot Rose, the Wily Dalziel horse, which has won its last 2 meetings, country cups, to be ridden by Linda Meach, but we'll be sticking with the Hayes boys on this one. Professor, my second tip will be in the Christmas Stakes, the 1100 metre listed race. Again, going with race 9, Mrs. Chrissy, trained by Kieran Maher to be ridden by Craig Williams, very much in form. Professor, last start winner, came back showing $2.60. If the track's racing to form, it should be a pretty good tip, I think, Mrs. Christie. Danger to that, I would have thought, is It's Our Time, number 1, trained by Danny O'Brien and also ridden by Daniel Stackhouse. But Professor, second tip is race 8, horse 9, Mrs. Christie. And my first tip is race 7, number 3, Marble Arch. And you like, Professor?
Pretty good aim and bet there, Gelding, Mrs. Chrissy.
Yes, around this time of year.
Yeah, I'm going a little bit earlier.
Yes. And hopefully we will have a bit of we'll have our Christmas spirit in us by then, Professor.
Yes, I think so, Gelding. I'm going a little bit earlier than you, Gelding. Race 2, the Joe Brown Handicap, one of the great race callers of all time.
Yes.
Yeah, how long was he calling races for, Gelding?
Yeah. Oh, geez. Does he hold the record for the Melbourne Cup? Or it would have been held there for a little while. Did he call 33 Melbourne Cups?
He would have called a lot, Gelding.
Yeah. Look, I'm not 100% sure on that, Professor. One of your famous questions without notice.
Yes, but he was a renowned race caller.
Renowned race caller, certainly. After the Second World War, and during the war, and that called for years. So, well-respected race caller.
All right, Gelding, it's a 1,000-metre race for a benchmark, 64 horses. I'm going with this one, Gelding, for number 8, Castellar, coming out of barrier 9. Couldn't get any wider than that in a 9-horse field.
Yep.
Five starts for 1 win and 1 placing, so a 20% win rate, 40% place rate. It's run twice at the Heath, Gelding, so here's a horse that's got multiple runs at the Heath. There wouldn't be many of those.
No, good form.
And was second at its last start at the Heath, over the same distance as it will be tomorrow. Informed jockey Craig Williams in the saddle, Gelding. It starts wide, but I don't think that'll be a problem. Craig Williams in career form, 16% over his last 50, trained by Robbie Lang. And he's in career form as well, Gelding, 14% over the last 50. So, and showing good each way odds, $4 and $1.50 at the moment.
Yes. Hopefully Willow can do well for us tomorrow.
Yeah, and at about the time we'll be taking the lid off the first bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, Gelding. I think race 3, the Frank O'Brien Handicap, another renowned race caller.
Yes. Certainly was, Professor.
Yeah, this one's over 1,100 metres. It's a benchmark 70. And I like in this one, Gelding, horse number 5, Elba, coming out of barrier 8. 10 starts for 3 wins and 5 placings, so 30% win rate, 80% place rate. First up today, first up tomorrow, Gelding, it's in equal class. It's won first up before, so I like that. It was a last start winner over 1,200 metres at Sandown way back in August, Gelding, which is probably the second last meeting that was held at the track.
Yes.
It's a versatile horse, Gelding. It's won over 1,000 metres, won over 1,200 and went over 1,300, so I don't think the 1,100 will be a worry for it tomorrow. Craig Williams also in the saddle with this one, so with your tip, Miss Chrissy, Gelding will want Craig Williams to ride a treble.
Well, he did it last meeting at the Heath, Professor. Yeah. I think he rode 4.
Yeah, he did. So that's his track. And the Freedmans, Anthony and Sam, trained this one. Gelding, they're in scintillating form. The last 50, 30% win rate.
Oh. Well, Professor, we've got Mara and we've got Moody, which we all talk about all that, but there's probably no better combination with the strike rate now of the Freedmans, Anthony and his son Sam. They're a fantastic training partnership, and they just seem to be firing on all cylinders at the moment, Professor. So nothing wrong with backing Freedman horses.
That's right, Gelding. So my two tomorrow are race 2, horse number 8, Castellar, and race 3, horse number 5, Elba. Now we turn to the vexed Professor's Parlay, Gelding, and last Saturday we were pretty unlucky, I thought.
My apologies, Professor. I was the one picking Nadal, forcing Nadal down to in a 1,400 metre race, which was a distance that hadn't run over, but the way it finished off the 1,200 at Cranbourne, Professor, I thought it would have eaten up Pakenham 1,400. And look, when it got back to last position, and Ethan Brown pulled it out, but the last 50, Professor, it just peaked on its run, I would have thought. Yeah. So well, not surprised to see during the week that sorry, Professor.
Yeah, go on. You weren't surprised during the week, what?
I was going to say just seemed to peak on its run the last 50 metres, and I have heard Kieran Maher say, or the Maher stable, that they're looking at keeping the horse at races up into 1,200. So it came from last to finish about 6th, Professor, but unfortunately doesn't help the Professor's Parlay.
No, Gelding. Look, I attach no blame to you, Gelding. I'll say this, that my study of the tracks, and we always say punters should understand how the tracks run, coming from near last on the turn at Cranbourne is a totally different race when you're coming from last on the turn at Pakenham, because you are not going to make up the same ground on the Pakenham track. It just doesn't let you do that.
Yep, that just seems to be the way, Professor. But look, don't go off Nadal, but it certainly, we're hoping for a big finish for the Professor's Parlay. So let's get it tomorrow.
We will get it tomorrow, Gelding. So last Saturday was Nadal into the Bills to beat the Patriots, and that happened, into the Green Bay Packers to beat the Saints, and did they give them a toweling up?
Yeah.
The Professor's Parlay drops back to 45%, but still well above the 40%. We'll finish above the 40% for the year, Gelding. So I think that's a pretty good effort. And
it's a fantastic effort, Professor.
All right. So tomorrow's agreed bet of the day, race 8, horse 9, Mrs. Chrissy, because we're going for the Omen bet.
Yep.
And we'll parlay that into the LA Clippers. The LA Clippers to beat the New England Patriots. Jim Harbaugh's LA Clippers, Gelding. People can't score against them. They're first in the NFL for defence. They've only allowed 274 points in 15 games. 18 points a game, or less or fewer they let in, Gelding. So that's not a bad effort. They're 6th in the AFC. They've won 9 from 15.
Is that the Clippers or the Rams, Professor?
Sorry, Gelding?
Is that the Clippers or the Rams?
No, the Clippers.
The Clippers.
The Clippers, yeah. The Clippers to beat the Patriots. The Patriots, Gelding, a season they'll forget. 16th in the AFC. That's not Tom Brady or Bill Belichick there now. They've only won 3 out of 15. They're only scoring at 17 points average per game, the second worst in the AFC and the third worst in the NFL. So I think the Clippers will account for the New England Patriots handily. And you mentioned their names before, Gelding. We'll parlay that into the LA Rams to beat the Arizona Cardinals. Yes. So we're going for both the LA teams, the Clippers, the Rams to beat the Arizona Cardinals. The Rams 3rd in the NFC at the moment. They've won 9 from 15. Home ground advantage, quarterback Matthew Stafford doing a great job. He's won a Super Bowl, and it wasn't all that long ago, Gelding, so they're retooling. Arizona Cardinals, they've fallen off the wagon. They were going very well, but over the last 4 or 5 games, haven't run a drum, Gelding. 11th in the NFC. They've only won 7 games.
Started well, Professor.
They did start very well, Gelding, but they've blown up in the straight.
Yep.
So
we've backed plenty of horses that have done that.
Yeah, the line's 6.5, Gelding, so the bookies don't like them as well. The LA Rams playing at home. So the Professor's Parlay tomorrow will be race 8, horse 9, Mrs. Chrissy, into the LA Clippers to beat the New England Patriots, into the LA Rams to beat the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Gelding, That's nearly all from us for this episode of That's Racing. But
quickly before we go, Professor.
Yes, Gelding.
Could I just wish Freddie Hogan, one of our followers and listeners, a Merry Christmas. We're supposed to catch up with him for a beer before Christmas, but we'll be doing that early in 2025, Professor.
Yes, Gelding, time got away from us. You didn't catch up with Freddie Hogan, and I didn't catch up with Paul from Richmond. So we'll do all that in the new year.
We will indeed.
All right, Gelding. Well, racing again on Saturday at the Valley.
Yes.
So until
then...
Kerrang. And Kerrang. Sorry, Gelding, and Kerrang. So until then, it's good luck.
And good punting.